everyone. This is Jeff Praissman with Interactive Brokers. It's my pleasure to welcome back to the IBKR podcast, Scott Bauer from Prosper Trading Academy. Hey, Scott, how are you?
Jeff, I am very happy to be here today.
Always love having you come in for our midweek sessions. And like always, no
lack of news in the markets.
Exactly. But I do want to kind of kick it off with last week first, before we even get into today and the week ahead. So, last week was really kind of the first week of Q2, and then obviously it opened up with some heightened volatility. What market themes or signals stood out most to you sort of during last week's trading?
Obviously, geopolitical risks, right? The minute by minute, it's escalating, it's not, it's escalating, it's not. But beyond that, I think what really was driving this market, if you will, is interest rates. And we're seeing them down today, but we saw that 10-year approach 440, even pushing up to 450 or so based on some inflation concerns. And I think that was as big of a concern for the equity markets as really anything else.
And what about labor data? Because we had some early April labor data and manufacturing readings. How are they shaping the expectations for the momentum heading into the...
Well, that March jobs report was certainly pretty impressive following what we saw in the February one. I think there's still some question out there about what is really real, what is not. Was it inclusive of the beginning of the Iranian war or not? So I think that is still yet to be determined. In terms of manufacturing, we did see ISM manufacturing pushing up just a little bit. Still in expansion territory. There is some lingering headwinds out there, but it's still in expansion territory here. And I think that it's the strongest run we've seen in about 4 years.
And what asset classes or sectors? There's obviously some appetite for risk out there, right?
Sure.
So which ones have kind of stood out in these first couple of days of trading?
Sure. IT, information technology. Obviously very volatile, but actually remained really strong. That was, if you look overall at stocks like Western Digital, STX, SanDisk, those were stocks that fell when there was some concern, but boy, those rallies were really steep. So pretty strong. And then some of the consumer staples area, stocks like Costco, Walmart, they fared really well during the risk appetite kind of arena that we saw over the last several weeks.
And kind of now heading to this week, right? Obviously, big market news last night, maybe not so much of a surprise for a lot of people, but market's up. But we also have some fundamental economic data coming out as well with the CPI and the PPI on the calendar this week. So you mentioned inflation earlier in the podcast. What kind of signals matter most right now for the market?
It'll be interesting to see what the data says about price pressures because of the oil spike, right? And because of rates. And the oil spike did start happening and will be included, some of that, in these reports that we're seeing. So the big drawdown we're seeing today is not going to be reflected in that. So the CPI release does cover March. It's going to be the first inflation print that will fully capture the beginning of the Middle East conflict here. So it'll be real interesting to see. I'm not sure we're going to be able to glean really a lot out of that, because the concern is going to be, okay, if that's behind us, what is next? So I think there will definitely be some pressure on that report, but it'll also be interesting to see what the Fed says about that.
And what should the investors be watching beyond the headlines, right? Obviously, tons of headlines going out, but like kind of going back to any kind of revisions or participation rates or any kind of underlying trends, besides just the chaos that we're seeing constantly.
Well, as I just mentioned, we will get FOMC minutes today. So I'm sure they're going to mention pretty strongly maybe some of the confusion around the Middle East conflict and how that is affecting inflation. But what makes this kind of FOMC minutes released today, I think, different is there's going to be less context. I don't think the market is really going to be able to discern kind of where the Fed is going from here. And we know how the landscape has changed from potential 2 cuts this year to maybe a raise later in the year. I don't think we're going to get any sort of clarity with that whatsoever. So I think what we do need to watch, and it's hard to look ahead, we've got earnings starting. We've got earnings starting next week. We have actually seen a huge uptick in guidance across sectors. So will that be able to kind of meet expectations? So I think it's still a very cautious market. Have to really keep things close to the vest.
Scott, as always, this has been great. For more from Scott Bauer, you can go to prospertrading.com. Also on our website, tons of podcasts, webinars, articles. Go to IBKR.com, click on education, scroll down to either webinars or podcasts, or even just search for Prosper Trading. Scott, as always, thanks for coming by and looking forward to our next session.
Thank you so much, Jeff.
The analysis in this material is provided for information only and is not and should not be construed as an offer to sell or the solicitation of an offer to buy any security. To the extent that this material discusses general market activity, industry, or sector trends, or other broad-based economic or political conditions, it should not be construed as research or investment advice. To the extent that it includes references to specific securities, commodities, currencies, or other instruments, those references do not constitute a recommendation by IBKR to buy, sell, or hold such investments. This material does not and is not intended to take into account the particular financial conditions, investment objectives, or requirements of individual customers. Before acting on this material, you should consider whether it is suitable for your particular circumstances and, as necessary, seek professional advice.